going through the school system, there was a divide. You were not encouraged to be Indigenous within the school. You were not encouraged to express your identity within the school. There was no opportunity, in fact, aside from maybe if you're a student in art class, to actually incorporate your Indigenous identity and culture into anything you did. And everything you were taught was actually the contrary and was part of this assimilationist movement to make us a part of the Canadian mainstream. Now we're understanding that assimilation's not going to work, segregation's not going to work, and that walking down this path of reconciliation, that we really need to be moving toward this more inclusive approach, where we're allowed to be Indigenous people.
The redesigned curriculum is all about putting our, it's allowing our students to see themselves in the classroom. And once they're able to do that, they feel a sense of belonging.
To understand who I am, just and my family and like my ancestors and like what they represented kind of, and like what they've been through, and like with residential schools and everything. I'm happy I learned about that at a young age, because now I know like why people in my family are kind of the way they are.
When I was a brand new principal at a new school that was opening, I received a call from my mom, and she said, "You know, Terry, I think I can come and to the opening of your new school, and I can celebrate with you." And that was huge for my mom, because she is Cree and she's a residential school survivor. And so for many years, I would be the one that would go to the parent-teacher interviews on my own, because my mom did not feel comfortable in a school. There was a lack of connection. So I would show up and I'd say, "So tell me how I did this reporting period." And because I lived in two worlds, and visibly I don't present as Aboriginal, so I could live in two worlds very equally. My mother, who's Cree, presents very Aboriginal, and so she lived in one world, and the westernized world was very foreign to her. And I always took that sense of disconnect.
The Diary of the Part-Time Indian, I always loved that one, because especially for me growing up, my father is non-First Nations, so I've always been lighter skinned, and growing up on the reserve, especially with people like Cloudy, I can quite tell that I'm not as Indian looking. And I always loved that book, reading it, because it almost made me think of me, well, I'm like on my reserve, everyone knows me, so obviously they know I'm First Nations, but when I'd go to other reserves and stuff like that, it's always funny, because sometimes you get people that like knows, but sometimes they're like, are you sure you're Indian? And
My classroom, I tried to create it as if they were coming home. So when you come home and you come home to family, family's not going to discipline you for if one of my students was having a bad day. Perfect example. One of my students came in and threw his backpack into the corner of the classroom, swore for about 4 minutes, and that's not something that you would accept in a school environment. It was just the two of us. I let him cool out. This was his space. It was a safe place that he was able to unload some of that anger and frustration that he had. And half an hour later, we were able to move on. So when I'm not talking about breaking rules, I'm talking about letting some of that stuff go.
I also grew up in Vancouver in the downtown east side. That's where I went to elementary school, and I went to 13 different elementary schools. My parents moved around a lot. My mom was a single mom, and I was always the new kid in school, but staying grounded to your culture is one thing. It's a type of balance, a type of foundation, and it was my teachers who were there for me to help me get through school. It was the stability that school provided that I didn't always have at home, and if I can give that back to students, then I believe that I've done my job.